Hope you had a good lunch. I'm Johan. I work as a, most of the time, software engineer, sometime developer advocate within ING, one of the largest banks in the Netherlands, where I help other teams and developers grow in their knowledge of both Java, technologies, frameworks, etc. And well, that includes the record of Java, which was added, well, some of you might have heard of it, in Java 16, although it was officially added in Java 14 as a preview feature. So who in the room is actually already using records within their code? Great, about half. So that's the typical answer I get. Most people know about it, but they haven't had a chance to actually use it yet. If you use a new LTS like 17 or 21 or 25 upcoming, you can actually start using it. So the question at that point is, why would you use it? Because you're used to Java in itself, and it's a transparent carrier for immutable data. So that's also what this talk is about, because I had some colleagues run into an issue where the record turned out to be immutable at that point. So what does it offer you? It's just like a basic class, but it's not synthetic sugar. So if you look at the bytecode, it is a different implementation. You do get a canonical constructor, which means that all the fields that you're adding to the record are at that point included as a field, but also they receive a getter which no longer has a get in front of it. So that's, for people who are new to records, it's something you have to get used to. You get a two-string hash code and equals for free. So Java takes care of all of that, but if you think I want to do it better, you can actually override those. So the way they look, and I think a box is a nice example for that, you put a label on it, you put stuff in it, and it has a size. You no longer have to write a large code of Java. It's just one-liner if you don't add any other stuff on it. So it's like this. You create the record, and to instantiate it, to actually use it, you just use this new line here. So when are you supposed to use records? Well, they do reduce the cognitive load that you have. And the problem with a lot of boiler code is you read over it. Well, you may not be interested in it because you write it once, and typically a year later you don't really care about all the boilerplate in your code. All those getters, all those constructors on top of it, the two strings, they work. So why would you change it? Why would you want to read through them? Records take care of that by simply removing them for you. And they work well when you actually have data that anyone can access. So if you do have passwords in your class, then maybe not use records because you want to keep those hidden. But another benefit, if you are in a high-speed, high-volume system, is that it actually, because it's different bytecode, it's not fully like a class. It can actually give you some speed-ups. But as always, depending on your use case, you should test for this on these performance measures. And we're talking about millions of attempts in a couple of seconds. So in a few TPS, you won't really notice the benefits. It's just millisecond work. And another thing that some of the Java champions actually tell you is to get rid of Lombok, because people can use value or add data, and you no longer need that at that point. I'm still a bit doubting if I should fully migrate away from Lombok, because it does have its benefits still, but I also understand that it also creates extra cognitive load for you as a developer, because you have to keep in mind the things that Lombok does for you. And Lombok is opinionated, so if you don't agree with that opinion, you have a challenge. And once you start migrating, you will actually notice that over the years, code has been evolving, and sometimes you will run into test failing because your code has become immutable, and stuff was mutated in the past by a merge request someone did a year ago. You never noticed. So you will actually find bugs, unintended, in your code, and I think that's a good thing. It's another review of your code and how it should evolve and perform. So when shouldn't you be using records? It is if you need to hide fields. Like I mentioned, if you have password stuff or some other things that you don't want to have your users be able to access because you want to cover them, just use a normal class. And the same applies to mutable fields. And it's a bit tricky because you can actually add mutable data to records, but you shouldn't because, again, cognitive load, people expect them to be immutable. So how can you get mutable records? Because this is something you have to be aware of. They are only shallow immutable. So if you add primitive types, it's fine, but if you add a class in itself can still be edited. There's no, unless it's a record, of course. At that point, you have record on record, and it's fine because those will remain immutable. But if you add a class in it, like for example an array list, you can actually just change the data inside, and everything will compile, no exceptions thrown, until something is running production, and we don't want that, of course. So how does this work? For example, you have a box. What do you do with a box? You add content to it, like an array list. And at that point, you can still change stuff. So let's pick up some code. Oh god, that's really, really big. I will make it a bit smaller. There you go. So normally you get all these fields, and again I will run the test because it's fast anyway. You get this all for free. So you have a hash code, you have a toString, you have an equals, and you have the constructor as well. They're all available to you with one single line. So my box record is just as simple as this, a one-liner, no more, no less. So how does this work when you have an array list? See if I can actually make this smaller as well. The trick I'm doing here is that I can add both items to the original array list, which was created here, and it will work fine. I can just add those to the list. I forgot to put something in, and I can still adjust my record, which was supposed to be immutable. So that's a mindfuck for you as a developer. You didn't expect that to happen. And the worst thing is because it's an array list, you can actually call the contents and add it to them as well. And then you might say, well, I could also use an unmodifiable list, which is partially true. Because if you call the contents at that point, it will actually tell you, I'm not allowed to do this. But if you have the original array list still available to you, you can still add items to that without an issue. And well, this is something that shouldn't happen too often in your code, but it's something you have to be aware of. So what can we do about that? Well, there's two options for that. And one of them is defensive constructors, where you just apply them yourself. So the proper way to make an immutable list within Java as of, I think Java 11 is list copy off. At that point, you really can't do anything with it anymore. Word noding is in the top, you see on the second line, the constructor. It doesn't have any of the fields anymore. You can still add those if you need to, but at that point you have to add all of them. If I have some time left in the end, I can actually show you what happens if you don't do that. I'm not too fond of these kind of solutions because you are adding default fields, and over time you might forget why you use those default fields. So this does compile, it works fine, but I think this solution is better, that you actually validate and throw an exception when things go wrong. And if you always throw the illegal argument exception because you are creating with a constructor, this is something that has a low cognitive load. It's easy to understand. If some record fails, you know, okay, it was something that I tried to add to this record at this point. And of course, you also give them a clear description in the exception what went wrong. Then there's another matter, because if you have records and they are supposedly, and you try to build them well, immutable, then sometimes you want to extend the data within them. You change one field, the box is the same, but the label might change, or the label and the contents might change, both together. Now the solutions for this might be either to build with functions, so withers, and Java was supposed to get those in Java 23. And I will also show an example of that after this sheet. But typically you can also use a builder, and in this case I have a builder that takes the original record and then copies all the existing fields, allows you to extend upon them and replace a value and then build it and then make it at that point immutable. But this, as you can see, is a lot of code, and if you want to have less boilerplate and something easy to read, then the withers are, I think, a better solution for this. So within Java 23, there was JEP 468. They suggested to use the wither functions. You can see at the bottom line the with keyword, but unfortunately it's not working yet. They didn't include it yet as a preview feature. They were supposed to in Java 23, but there are some challenges doing this well, so I'm afraid we'll have to wait a little bit longer for this. But I think this is quite clear on what it's doing and quite readable, much better than all those methods included in all those functions. So I can't wait to see those in, and I'm going to ask Nikolai in 1 hour when we can expect those. So these are the main challenges. Other than that, records are quite great actually. So when should you stop migrating and how should you stop migrating? And you can migrate all your code manually, but like I mentioned, the fields will result in getters that no longer have a get in front of them. So I do like IntelliJ, and typically I use that to adjust my code. If you convert it like this, it will also take care of all the getters and setters in your code, no matter how large your project is. So that's quite nice. But if you've been using Lombok, for example, with add value, there's no longer a need for that. You have records now, so why would you add that extra feature on top? Typically, I have seen people use add value, add builder, and add SLF4j on top of classes. And there's a wonderful recipe with Lombok value to record that takes care of that and will leave the other ones behind. Especially the builder parts, people use that a lot. Then you don't have all the extended code on top of it. That will then remain. It will work with the record actually. The only downside I found so far, you can see at the bottom, there's method references, the double dots. And we use those quite a lot in lambdas within our code. You do have to still change those manually, but that's easily done because you run the recipe in like half a minute. You get a merge request, you run your tests, and you fix those, and then everything is still fine because, of course, we write wonderful tests that cover everything that is important. So, should you migrate? It really depends. And what I typically tell people is to migrate slowly whenever you need to. So if you build new functionality, just start using records at that point. It will already force you to think about what should be immutable, what's not. And existing code, you can at that point, at your own pace, start migrating. Because, as mentioned, some of your tests might fail because of changing to immutability and the old code not keeping that in mind and failing on that aspect. And of course, build them where they add value. And typically, if you build something new, it's much easier to just pick up records. They're really feel like classes, they're writing like classes, but with a lot less code on your screen, so a lot less cognitive load. In preparation of this talk, I also wrote 2 blog articles about this. And I think the top one claims to be 12-minute read, so quite a lot. There's a lot of information in this. And the widow's part, how do you copy a record, is covered in the second article.